Wait for the cats to finish making a noise.
Yeah. I heard you. You just want to check I heard you, did you?
Carry on. So I've been talking a lot on the channel about how to improvise a session, or more accurately, how to get by with less prep. So I see a lot of chats either on other YouTube channels or in the various Discord groups, particularly the Start Playing group, which is very active, the GMs group, about how much prep you should do and the prep materials that you should have prepared. And I want to say that I am probably an outlier in the minimal amount of prep that I do, but not doing prep is not the same as being unprepared. I'm working on videos that cover this and scripts and things so that I don't miss anything, but I wanted to talk today, give an example of how I work, how my games run and my brain kind of works. I guess I don't want to tell people to go into games unprepared. I want to tell people to stress less about preparation and about how to flex your improv muscles in a way that you hadn't really thought of. People think of improv in the sense of like, oh, I need to make up a character, I need to have a conversation, I need to like flesh out certain elements. Improv can be much deeper than that. It can be much more expansive than that. Anyway, this is just a short little video to give an example. So I've been running in-person games at D20. It's a board game cafe in the north west London, in Uxbridge. Well, I guess that's more West London. And it's been D&D that I've been running at the moment because, again, D&D has saturated the market. It's what everybody knows. It's what people come into the hobby wanting to play. But happy to run D&D for the time being. The first game that I ran, I based off of a paranoia scenario, the stealth train scenario, if anyone's familiar with that one from the Crash Priority book. I'm a big fan of Paranoia and all its modules. I think its modules are all written really well. It's the only game that I actually kind of run the modules as they're more or less how they are written. So yeah, I think they're written really well. So I kind of adapted that one into a D&D setting. I couldn't have the chaos of Paranoia, of course, the constant character death and utter futility of whatever's doing. The players in D&D need to feel like they're achieving something, whereas in Paranoia the players can just feel like expendable cannon fodder. That's fine, that's how the game works. The second session that I ran is a better example for these purposes because it was an almost it was a classic kind of improvised scenario for me. So it was a different group of players in both games and I didn't know any of them. They were all just people who came to the cafe, signed up on the cafe. I hadn't spoken to them before the session. So they some of them had played once or twice before. Well, at least one of them hadn't played at all. And my concept for the one shot was that the players would arrive in a town to discover that their town was empty. The town was Mary Celeste style, just been empty of people. Mystery as to where everyone had gone. Kind of the baseline, I guess, was the film Phantoms was my inspiration. If anybody's seen that, there's probably other examples as well, but that's the one that springs to my mind.
Affleck was the bomb in Phantoms.
So it had a kind of baseline of horror, like a horror setting. Which was going to work off of, and then I could try and feed and figure out what the players wanted. But I went into it with that concept, the empty town, and then I had no notes whatsoever. I'd written nothing down. I had prepared no maps. I had prepared no enemies. I had done no research. I hadn't mapped out the town at all. I didn't know anything other than that vague concept. Players want to arrive in a town, discover all the people had been disappeared or vanished or whatever, and that was it. That was all I went in with, genuinely all I went in with. So the player characters came together and we had 2 rogues, a sorcerer and a paladin, who was sort of a nature paladin, a worshipper of the nature, that lived a hermit's life in the woods, and kind of like defended the woods basically. The 2 players who had come from characters they already had played in previous games at the cafe knew each other and they were travelling together. They'd picked up one of the other characters on the side of the road, the other rogue, who had just stolen a magical artifact from the woods, and they were being chased down by the paladin who was trying to get the magical artifact back. It was a tree sapling. So the 2 new players who made new characters, who had come to the session together, made characters who were deliberately opposed to each other. One who had stolen something from the other one. So that was the scenario, and they were travelling into this town. The 3 who were in the coach arrived in the town, and I described how they got to the the inn, and the coach driver then took the horses around the back to stable them, and told them to go ahead and go into the inn and get rooms and whatever else. Meanwhile, the paladin player, she decided to follow at a distance, and she decided to surf down the river. She wanted to take the river into town, into the edge of town, and kind of sneak around that way to try and catch the others, or catch the person she was chasing, the other player she was chasing. It's important to note here that I didn't describe the place as having a river, or the village having a river guiding through it. The player just asked if they could ride the river into town, and I said yes. So I had to create a river, and everything that led from the river is purely because the player just asked if they could take the river in instead. So she cacked off basically made a surfboard out of a side of a tree bark, and surfed that down into the edge of town. The rogue who stole the tree sapling, meanwhile, is trying to sell it to the other players. So there's a lot of in-character conversation happening here. I gave them the option of examining it, but he wouldn't let them. If the sorcerer had examined it, I would have allowed it to be an actual magical artifact. He didn't know what he thought; it was just stolen a tree. But I would have allowed it to be a magical artifact of some kind if anyone had bothered to, examine it or try and figure out if it was special. But he couldn't convince anyone to buy it off of him. So instead, he just threw it away. So he just threw it away down the road, and just chucked it into a ditch. So that was the end of the tree sapling, unbeknownst to the paladin player who was trying. I mean, the player knew, but the character didn't know as they were travelling into the village. Even though I was sort of starting to brainstorm ideas of what this tree could be about, maybe I could build the entire adventure around this tree, the entire one shot. I was sort of formulating ideas there, but nope. He just chucked the tree in a ditch, and they went into the inn. I went into the inn to discover that, as with the concept, there was no one there, no staff, no patrons, nobody there at all. They poked around, broke into the back, drank some free beer, ate some free food, getting a bit creeped out that there was nobody there, but taking advantage of the situation, because we did have, like I said, there was two of the three of them were rogues. Nonetheless, they were creeped out that there was nobody about, so they began investigating, and the sorcerer went upstairs, at which point the last sort of thing I had in my mind was that there was a creature, an entity, searching one of the upstairs bedrooms. Other than that, the place was empty. So they went upstairs and discovered this entity, and I decided to make it one of this homebrew monster that I've used before, which is this chitinous carapace creature that of these segmented kind of beetle-like shells, plates that can shift about on each other and essentially give it a shape-changing ability. It's quite good it's quite adaptable to levels. Basically, it can shapeshift itself into any low-level creature from the monster manual. So basically it can turn itself into a wolf or a gorilla or a shark or whatever it can shift itself into being. So you can basically attack the players with any given basic animal, but in this like horror movie kind of form of this shape-shifting entity. So she encountered this in its giant beetle form, ransacking one of the rooms. Now, I didn't know why it was ransacking one of the rooms. I just needed the players to encounter one of these things. I didn't know what had happened to the town at this point. Didn't know what happened to any of the villagers. Didn't know what this creature was searching for, if indeed it was searching for anything. I know precisely about what this one shot. I know exactly what you know now. What I'm telling you is what I had come up with so far. Meanwhile, the paladin surfing down the river comes across the mill on the riverside, only to discover that it is boarded up, and there is a hastily built kind of perimeter fence and a bunch of traps set around. And again, just totally improvised that. I didn't really have a plan for it, but it gave me the option that there could be townsfolk hiding out in the mill. They could have turned the mill into a little fortress to defend themselves against whatever was attacking the town, so that could be where the townsfolk were. That was an option that I had open to me. So I described the mill as it was kind of a fortress that had been hastily put together. But they weren't interested. They made their way around the traps and through the fencing, and decided to just keep going into the town, just follow the river, round the mill, and go into the town proper and not explore the mill at all. So I had that option, but then didn't need it anymore. So it was still in the back of my mind, but it then kind of got scrapped because they didn't want to explore that. So they headed out into the village. In the village, I had them spot somebody just kind of darting between the buildings, someone kind of skirting about. and if they wanted to like track that person or capture that person, they probably could quite easily. It was just going to be a basic sort of townsfolk. They decided to ignore that at first and search the town a little bit, again discovering that nobody seemed to be in the town, all their homes seemed to be empty, and this would have given them the option to, you know, steal stuff or hide out something, or they could have found something if they decided to delve deeper. But after like a moment of just kind of looking about, seeing that no one was about, they opted to try and track the person they had seen running through the alleys. So they began kind of tracking them through the town until they discovered that something else was tracking that person. So another one of these shapeshifting creatures that was on a rooftop had been tracking the other individual who had been running around the town, and had caught the paladin on their radar and immediately spotted them. Back in the tavern, the sorcerer snuck back downstairs in order to tell the two rogues that there was this thing upstairs that was doing something. And again, all the while, because I've got my creature doing something, I've got a scenario that looks like something's happening. It looks like there's a mystery to solve, even though there isn't. So I've created this intrigue set up that they're up to something. So they decide to sneak back upstairs to try and catch this thing or see what it is. Unfortunately, completely fluff the stealth and call attention to themselves, at which point this thing, sort of creepily horror movie-esque style, crawls out into the corridor, shifts from bug form to wolf form, and charges at them. The first of several combats ensues. This was a combat-heavy one-shot, but all theatre of the mind and all trying to keep it going at quite a clip. The paladin, meanwhile, sees this thing coming down off of the roof and crawling down, this bug creature, and attempts to engage it in conversation. Player had never played D&D before, so they were a little bit more prone to creative thinking. D&D hadn't driven the creative thinking out of them yet, so they were trying to dictate a relationship with this thing, a pre-established relationship with this thing, which I didn't want to squash, but I also didn't really make sense. So I had the thing sort of recognise them, or at least get confused by the fact that they were starting conversation. So this thing kind of took pause, came down, and shapeshifted itself into a vague form that matched them. They were a gnome, unable to directly engage with them in conversation, but clearly intrigued by them. So at this point, it's very clear that the players are quite conversational. They're quite social. They've had a lot of social interaction between each other, and they've immediately attempted a social interaction with this creature. So it's clear that would interest them to do. So rather than make these a faceless mass of monster that is just terrorizing the town, I decided to make them a little bit more sentient, and also give them a boss, I guess a someone controlling them, who they would be able to converse with. Clearly they wanted the option to be able to have conversation, or be able to do this, play the scenario through with, you know, socially. So I wanted to give them that option, so I gave the creatures a little bit more sentience. I decided to make them constructs that were sort of programmed to follow orders, and they were being controlled by a group of people or a person. And this one had mistakenly, she had charmed it enough that it had sort of mistaken her for one of its group, at which point I immediately figured that, well, they're probably gnomes, so they're probably being controlled by gnomes, hence why it mistook this gnome paladin for potentially one of their masters. So I begin describing these creatures as hollow inside and giving off a magical glow, because they are basically just these enchanted pieces of plate metal that can shift themselves around to shape change. Meanwhile, the individual who was running through the town, the townsfolk, runs to the tavern and busts their way inside, whilst the paladin who has befriended the other creature also makes their way there. At this point I was trying to get around the slight awkwardness of the party not being together, the three players having combat encounters and the one other player just kind of running around the town was getting a little bit awkward. I needed to bring them together, and they had a built-in excuse that the paladin was following this other person, so I just had that person just go to the inn just to bring the party together, just so they had the option there, so they knew where each other were. At this stage, I don't really know where the players are going to go with this. They're not the most heroic group of people. They're sort of a mishmash, and I know that the paladin and the rogue that stole the tree sapling are going to clash as soon as she arrives at the inn. So that storyline's going to take over a little bit. So I start having a small horde of these things begin to descend upon the inn as the paladin is arriving, so that either they will force them into town, or if they try to leave town, they'll have some trouble. And I can always have, wherever they go, I can always have the conclusion to that storyline just appear wherever it is. So I've been to create a kind of a ticking clock that they've got to leave the inn. Either they're going to go explore the town, or they're going to leave town. We've got to do one of those sooner rather than later. But once the paladin arrives with the creature that they've befriended, again it gets into a clash between her and the rogue who stole the tree sapling. They hash it out. The creature that she befriended begins to turn hostile, having spotted the rest of the group, recognizing them as either a threat or a target. It turns into a giant shark head at one point and eats the paladin, or it tries to munch down on her. But they eventually manage to defeat that one as well, at which point the paladin says enough of this and decides to go look for her tree sapling in the ditch where the rogue character dumped it. So she leaves the tavern and exits town down the road to try and find this thing. Meanwhile, the others are thinking that they need to figure out what's going on, or at least not get themselves killed on the way out of town. But also one of the rogues is like, we should definitely rob this place. So there's got to be a treasury in town somewhere that they can steal. Fine. That's a good enough plan as any. So they begin preparing to head into town to try and find the treasury. They speak to the townsfolk, who says he assumes the treasury is in the town hall, and there's probably some money there. He himself, all this only happened a couple of days ago, so he himself was just trying to gather enough supplies so that he could hit the road, because it's a week on foot to the nearest other town. This is a little travelling community. So it's a week on foot. He's been trying to gather enough supplies about the town so that he can head out and not die on the road. For the last couple of days. So, but yeah, he figures that if there's no treasury, it's in the town hall. So they're going to make their way to the town hall and try and rob the place. So the paladins go out on their own. I allow the other group to sneak out of the tavern. They do a fairly efficient job of doing that anyway. I don't just let them do it, but they manage to sneak out of the tavern and through the alleys and further into the town, whilst the creatures that have descended upon the tavern out from outside are distracted by the paladin, who has gone out of town up the road to collect their tree sapling. And the small horde of creatures then follows the paladin with the intention of capturing her. She has a small fight with them, but she's overwhelmed relatively easily and they capture her. My alternate option would have been that they could have taken the tree, because they would have recognised it as something magical that might be worth hoarding, and magical supplies would be something that the group that's controlling them came here to hoard, in which case she would have followed them that way, but as it happens she just got captured by them. The thing about one shots, you love to give the players as much freedom as possible. I love to want open world, but it's a one shot, and I know we've got to conclude it within 3 hours, so I've got to you've got to have a little bit of railroading just to get the players to a conclusion point, particularly if they're prone to spread out. If this was a regular campaign game, I would be more than happy for them to just sort of spread out and have disparate things that eventually would come together. But I've got to conclude this story within 3 hours, so you have to manipulate the situation a tiny bit there. So anyway, the rest of the group are heading to the town hall, so I decided to make that my end location, and whoever's controlling these constructs is there, and that I decided to make that just one person, because we're a little bit short on time, so I don't have time for like 50 different social interactions, so I'm just going to make one person, an elderly gnome who had built these things, like a necromantic artificer who built these things to kidnap the town so that he could harvest their souls in order to gain power or youth or whatever. It doesn't necessarily matter. He just wants to harvest these souls to power up a very powerful spell. And again, coming up with all of this on the fly. The only reason he's a gnome is because the gnome paladin tried to charm one of the creatures, and I wanted an excuse for them to be confused. So they're confused because they recognised another gnome and thought it might be the one that was giving them orders. So this is why it's a gnome individual. He's captured the town because I needed the town to just be gone, so he's just got all of their souls ensorcelled somewhere, and it's in the town hall because that is just where the group was heading anyway, and they wanted to rob the place, and there is gold to steal there for sure. So as they snuck through the town, they arrive at the same time that the creatures who had captured the paladin are arriving with her in this big kind of webbed up, in this black webbing that they shoot out. I've determined, again, as I said, I needed them to be able to capture her, so now these creatures can shoot black webbing, Spider-Man style, and web people up. So again, improvising upon the needs of the scenario. Anyway, they're dragging her across the street. She tries to escape, but unfortunately fails, although I would have happily allowed it, and they begin to drag her into the town hall as the others watch. They don't intervene which is interesting. But they allow her to be dragged inside the town hall so that they can sneak around and observe the situation. Paladin, the gnome paladin, is dragged in and presented to the gnome master as another sacrifice to this soul forge that they're basically creating, which indicates that these are all the souls. He's got the souls kind of suspended in the ceiling, in a kind of menagerie kind of way, of just all these souls hanging from captured souls hanging from the ceiling as he kind of builds the spell, and he's there in this kind of outer mech suit. Partly because I have a mini that actually looks like that. It's a dwarf in a mech suit, basically, in a kind of like Iron Man-y kind of thing, but like an exoskeleton. So he's I didn't have that mini on me at the time. I just own it, so I just like, well, I think I just popped into my head. So he's there wearing that, because he's so old he can barely move, so he's got this exoskeleton that helps him get about and fight and stuff, and he's trying to cast this spell. He monologues to her a little bit that he's been harvesting the souls. He's going to harvest her soul to add it to the soul forge so that he can regain his youth and power, and the knowledge that he has now in a younger, more powerful body could make him very, very dangerous. And the creatures put her in the middle of the ritual circle, and he begins casting the spell to harvest her soul. So the guys outside decide they're going to break in. Again, they fluff the stealth a little bit and accidentally call attention to themselves. So a fight breaks out outside as two of these creatures come out to fight them. There's some creative use of spells and everything else here as they try and get inside. This is just basically a delaying tactic, so that they could have a fight in the front of the building, whilst giving the paladin a chance to try and, which would cause enough of a distraction from the creatures, so the paladin had a chance to try and engineer their way out of this situation. They managed to cause enough disruption to the magic circle that they have been trapped in, that they can act very briefly. They can get like one round of actions off whilst the fight is happening, and they're trying to break in at the far end. One of the rogues has snuck up onto the roof so that they can look down through the high windows, and this is our end scenario. We've kind of got half an hour left of the session, and this is our conclusion. They're either going to overpower this gnome, or they're going to escape and everything's going to go wrong. Unsurprisingly, they opt to try and charm their way through this. So the paladin does tackle the gnome to the ground before they can complete the spell, but then they attempt to, through charm person and a few other conversational elements, to try and manipulate this gnome into thinking that they're there to help them, or that they have mutual goals, or that they just want to they want the treasury. They manage to convince them to reveal where the treasury is hidden so that the rogues can steal it. Again, not a huge surprise. I can see that was the way this group wanted to go, rather than like a big all-out combat. They're only level 2. They end up tricking him with a couple of well-placed spells and some well-said words into allowing them into the sanctum and relieving himself of his exoskeleton, which was what gave him kind of the power. And then they basically just murder him. He killed an entire town, so they don't feel they feel a little bit funny about it, but they don't feel too bad about just like stomping this guy, because the souls are captured here. I told them that if they can get the right kind of spell powers going on, that they can reverse what happened. They can bring all these people back with the right in the right circumstances, with the right expertise. So they determine that if they just get rid of this guy who is clearly evil, it sort of power downs, in that lazy way, it kind of powers down all of the chitinous creatures, the constructs. They're without their master anymore. That's how the scenario ended. It'd been quite a combat heavy session for a one shot, all theatre of the mind. But I didn't want to bog us down with combat at the end there. So they successfully tricked the guy. They were able to just take him out whatever way they wanted to. But that was the scenario. That was a 0 notes, vague concept. The concept being phantoms. You go into a town and all the people have disappeared. And then just kind of building it from there, trying to see what the players wanted to do, what interested them, and lean the scenario in that direction. As scenarios go, you could argue it was relatively narrow, but it could have just been a series of monster encounters, a series of little fights. I had the mill there, so they could have met like a whole bunch of townsfolk, which would have changed the scenario completely if they were all hiding out in there, which case it probably would have just been a monster fight. I'm not sure what would have happened then. They probably would have had to have found some kind of queen monster, or like the lead monster, maybe given this kind of hive mind element to it. They could have just robbed the town, which they kind of wanted to do anyway, which they kind of also did. They spent a little bit too long arguing amongst themselves, or role-playing amongst themselves in the tavern, for them to become a coherent unit. It was clear they weren't going to become a coherent unit. They were going to, their goals were disparate, so they weren't going to pull off an elaborate heist in the time that we had allotted. The paladin was doing their own thing, and was kind of, because the paladin was a rogue agent, working on their own principles. If they tried to investigate what the creature was looking for, I could have improvised something there, I'm sure. I'm sure they would have some sort of magical artifact. It would have been probably about the town hoarding artifacts or something, or maybe the creatures had come to town looking for a specific thing, and if they had found that, they'd given it to them, they'd have gone away. The townsfolk could be in the wrong. The townsfolk could have stolen something, like the rogue stole the tree. A scenario like that, the townsfolk maybe took something from the forest that they shouldn't have, and then there's a moral lesson all come together. But yeah, as it was, what kind of drove it was the paladin attempted to befriend one of the creatures, or talk to them like everything was fine, and that just kind of made me think, well, I guess they need to be more sentient. There needs to be more of a logic to what they're doing. They need to be sort of vaguely, they could be manipulated in the right circumstances, so that the players could have gone that route and just tried to control these creatures instead. I'm hoping that gives an idea of how I run low prep games or improvised heavy games, particularly in one-shot scenarios. That obviously had like a relatively vague base, but it's also kind of strong. If you have any questions about how that came about, or it's unclear what I'm talking about, hopefully when I watch this video back it all makes sense. But that's how I improvised that from almost nothing. It just came to me in the moment, and within like the 3-hour block of us playing, that was entirely pieced together from every little thing. Every time the players did something, or the way they behaved, you'd have to take that and you have to move the scenario in that direction. You have to add on. It's the yes and. Yes and doesn't mean just saying yes to everything, but it means not ignoring what people are doing, not ignoring other people's ideas. So when the players would do something or attempt something or suggest something, take it and add it to the story and move the story in that direction, and always be adding to what's happening. Never be ignoring or subtracting away. Take an idea and build on it. Rather than say yes to it, just it needs to be significant. So the paladin tried to talk to the creature as if it knew what it was, if it knew them. Yes, but that's not precisely correct. They did that. Maybe they were mistaken. Maybe it was a genuine bluff, but it was enough to confuse the creature. So I took it, and I yes-anded it that idea to just be like, okay, you've confused this creature, you've manipulated this creature. Now this creature is more sentient than I had intended at the very start of the session. It has a more specific goal than I had intended, and it recognised something in you. Again, not intended. So the entire conclusion of that scenario wasn't there when I started the game. The whole this gnome in an exoskeleton harvesting the town's souls. That's not how it went in the end. That's not what I had planned. And like I said, I knew that he needed to be manipulable or open to social interaction. He has a very specific goal, because I knew the players were playing quite socially, so they needed to be able to converse with him. He needed to be very clearly evil, because the players were not necessarily good. They were discussing like how can they rob the town while there's nobody here, openly in front of one of the surviving townsfolk. So I knew that they weren't like a traditionally heroic group, so I needed to make sure that he was very clearly the villain, so that they could unite against him. But yeah, it needed to be less about big dangerous boss fight and more about how do we trick this guy, or how do we get around this guy, or how do we stop this guy. Anyway, it might be easier just for me to answer questions if there wasn't any there. Hopefully this sort of explained itself. But yeah, drop questions in the comments about how that kind of came about. Hopefully this was a given insight for this little mini series that I'm doing, to give an insight into what I'm talking about to some degree in how I create scenarios on the fly. I'm very good at it, and I totally sympathise if that's not kind of just how you can work. If you need something mapped out, that's fine. But I'm quite confident I can go into a scenario like I haven't got a huge amount planned here, if indeed anything planned here, but I'm confident that I can just pull something out. And I run a lot of one-shot scenarios in the same way, particularly at conventions and things, and people afterwards do talk to me like, oh my god, what did you have planned, what were the other scenario, what were the branching options, what if we had done this and this and this, and I just have to sort of tell them that I don't know what I'm genuinely like making, at a certain point I'm just making this up as I go along. Like I've maybe got an hour, half an hour to an hour maybe of the game sort of enough in my head to run, and then after that it's just a scattershot of ideas. People do ask how, what did I have planned, what was the scenario, what was really happening in the scenario, particularly if it's a mystery scenario, and I'm like, well, I don't know. I genuinely don't know. I can make something up now, but there was no puzzle for you to uncover. It was an evolving story that was shaped by your actions and your intentions, and there was no puzzle to solve, so to speak. There was no mystery, no conspiracy to uncover. That just is that I'm just quick enough, in the way that I think that I can build that scenario as we go, and you can uncover it. I just need to be one step ahead of the players. Yeah, again, I'm just kind of good at it. So I hopefully I can impart some of that understanding onto you through these videos. But yeah, like I say, drop some questions in the comments. Please do like and subscribe. Check out the rest of this video series. I'm going to kind of go into more depth into this process going forward. But yeah, check out the rest of my videos, all my actual play stuff. My links below, my Ko-fi support page, my Discord server, my Start Playing profile. I run games on Start Playing as a professional GM, or at least I'm starting to. You can find some mostly non-D&D stuff on there, so yeah, jump on some of those. That would be good fun. And yeah, I will catch you next time. The end. Said that in a weird staccato way.